Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's class. I feel like this is a special class. It was more of an impromptu class that Darlene and I are going to step through today. And what we're talking about is we're looking at inflammation and some of these things that disrupt your health. And there's a lot of different reasons that you may be working with our team. You may be here for hormone imbalances like infertility or endometriosis, uterine fibroids, PCOS. Perhaps it's an issue like menopause. Maybe you're just wanting to feel great. Other times it could be some type of chronic disease, autoimmunity, irritable bowel issues, thyroid issues. And then, we have some patients that are in here for the longevity. They have chronic pain like arthritis, or, they're having some type of neuropathy, or maybe you're here because, you're dealing with some type of malignancy or cancer. So even all the way to neurodegeneration. So that's kind of the span of the different types of patients that we typically work with. And we focus so much on the things that you can do. And most of you'll find yourself in a space thinking like, okay, what supplement am I doing next? And, a lot of times, even for us, we know we have to move you from one state to the next. And we're talking about supplements, but throughout the program, you're always learning or refocusing your efforts on the 5 healthy behaviors. And diet is just one of those 5. We talk about diet, we talk about rest, we talk about exercise, we talk about stress management and supplementation. Well, today, we're not going to really talk about diet and supplementation. Today, we're going to talk about 2 major pieces that are often overlooked way too much. And sometimes there's not enough emphasis on the part of focusing on these issues and why they're so disruptive. So that we're going to talk about is sleep and stress management today. And honestly, in the near future, we're going to have another class coming out on just stress management, dealing with different types of things that have occurred, the psychology behind inflammation, the psychology behind autoimmunity, the psychology involved and intertwined with malignancies and all these different chronic issues. And we also see psychology playing into the realm of infertility. And what's crazy about that is I feel like it's always been something, especially when I talk to my father's generation, that there's a stigma. And Darlene, you can tell me, if you feel that there's been a stigma too, or your experiences. Stigma is thinking that, that stress or maybe just feeling tired, itself doesn't interfere with your health. It's just like one of those things you push through. I mean, do you feel like a lot of times that's the case? Yeah, it's
Yeah, I would
interesting.
where it doesn't apply.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So stress is such a big piece. So and one of my favorite things to do is take these concepts of holistic medicine and holistic health and nutrition and actually look at the research that backs up what we're saying, because we know it's true. We see it time and time again. We see the effects of what we do, these lifestyle, because that's really what we're doing here. We're doing lifestyle medicine. And what we're doing is we're taking all these different aspects, these 5 healthy behaviors, and then the 5 triggers of disease and inflammation. And we're approaching those and affecting it from every aspect of your health and your life, and what your exposures are and your behaviors that lead to either health or away from health, like toward some type of disease process. Many of you may not even be in a disease process. You're in that area of dysfunction. When we looked at those labs, there's that optimal range, then there's that dysfunctional range, and then there's the disease and damage range. And many of you are sitting in that dysfunctional range, right? But we want to make sure that in every way possible, we're moving you further away from disease and damage, from dysfunction into balance and optimal health. And we want that for everybody. And the system's proven we have a really good thing, but we want to make sure that we're helping you reinforce your efforts and double down on the things that are going to make massive improvements with your health. So today, we're going to be talking about inflammation in regards to your sleep and your stress. Now, when we're talking about this, like when we're looking at how inflammation affects lifespan, It's crazy. And Darlene, on my screen, I see a picture of you over here. Is the imaging overlapping on the slides? Do you see it okay?
All I see only you, and I see what determines lifespan. That's
All
all
right,
that's on the screen.
cool. All right, I just want to make sure I'm not blocking anything out. So chronic disease is by far one of the biggest challenges we face. 1 in 2 Americans have a chronic disease. 1 in 4 has multiple chronic disease. 1 in 4, right? That's a massive amount. 27% of kids now have chronic disease, up from just 13% in 1994. And it's responsible for nearly 7 out of every 10 deaths. So 70% of deaths are due to chronic disease, which is driven by inflammation. So this really drives your lifespan. When we're looking specifically at inflammation, we know that inflammation has been implicated in the pathology. They call it pathophysiology of arterial degeneration, immunosenescence, which is the decline and the death of your immune cells. It's related to diabetes, metabolic syndrome. You've probably heard that on some of you with your lab reviews. Heart disease, Alzheimer's, and just disability in general, right? So many of you have pain or neuropathies. We'll see that there. It also, we found that as you get older, you have disruption in your immune system. So everything that we can do to stack advantages to make sure that our body is not moving to a more inflammatory state is super important. So when we're looking at how this affects our brain and our mind and our health, when you see brain fog or changes in mood, people have body pain or low energy, recurring headaches, it does this inflammatory process, so it steals your personality. And some of you may have had that experience. I mean, I know at times when I haven't felt great, when my inflammation was higher, I did. It wasn't, my true personality. I felt just couldn't shine through. It's like a fog. But with all of these cases, most of the time, at the end, we're going to find inflammation. I mean, and all of us in our office can speak from experience. This isn't like we're not doing this, without any of experience or having some type of suffering of these conditions our own. We all had our own stories on this. So it really impacts the brain. And so you have this chronic inflammatory response. And why is that a problem? Well, your brain controls everything in your body. I think one of the craziest things I hear when people say it's all in your head, that's the worst place for it to be, because your brain controls everything, right? So in your head is a bad place. So what are some of the drivers of that? Well, we know stress can actually trigger inflammation, and we're going to be talking about sleep and stress, but there's all these other triggers of inflammation that drive that process, but it can also start in the brain just based on our thought processes and how we're handling stress. There's a whole inflammatory cytokines. Cytokines are the inflammatory chemicals in your body. So when we say we measure inflammation, most of the time we're actually measuring cytokines. And there's this overlap, and you'll see the circle in here. So you got the stress up in the brain, causes disruption in these microglial cells. That's the white blood cells in your brain. You also have macrophages and monocytes. So these microglial cells are the macrophage of the brain. So these get disrupted and out of control, and they'll just spill out inflammatory chemicals. But this then goes down and affects the gut. And you have this cycle throughout your whole body. So when you have either some type of damage mediated or some type of other inflammatory, like a microbial mediated damage, that's the MAMP and the DAMP. One's microbe and one is damage. So these can create damages to your body or an inflammatory response in your body that will inflame the brain. But also the brain inflammation creates a more likely scenario that you're going to get inflammation elsewhere in the body. So you can actually get an inflammatory response from thoughts, from stress, from poor sleep in the same pathways that is if you had an infection or you actually had damage. It's crazy. So stress is very damaging to your body. And so when what's that, darling?
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to say that this whole thing where people say, well, I had all of these symptoms and the doctors kept telling me it was all in my head. I think everything you're saying is proving that it's not to be dismissed just because it's in your head. That's even a bigger reason because this inflammatory cycle and what it affects. So,
Yeah. And it's so crazy that we separate, like, we separate the head from the body in Western medicine, right? It's crazy. Psychiatry is the closest thing we got. And, they, as far as looking at the mind as a source of disease, but they're still looking at disrupting biochemistry. But when you look at all these, esoteric religions and philosophies, like the chakras, the top chakras in the head, it's like that's the connection to everything. But your head's at the top of your body and it's moving that thing around, right? So it is crazy. There's a lot to be said about that. So, in a lot of our classes, even in some of the presentations and webinars that we put on, we talk about foods, right? So the food pyramid, it's inflammatory because of the disruption in your macronutrients, your big ones like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Too many carbohydrates is inflammatory because it disrupts your blood sugar. And blood sugar is inflammatory. It sticks to things that damages them. But it isn't just about the food pyramid and these macros. Part of the problem is the chemicals that are in the food, the preservatives that are in the food, the toxins that get in the food from the soil. These are very inflammatory. So as we're going through this process and we're working through everything, when you think of the diet as the one of the major healthy behaviors, you also want to be thinking about what is in the food that you're eating. Not just is it organic, you want to be thinking what are the you can eat you can or get totally organic meals and still be diabetic because you're getting too many carbohydrates. You can be completely organic and eating too much fat. You could be eating organic and get too much protein. Too much of anything is bad, and too little of anything is bad. So, you have to watch that balance. Some of these foods have chemicals in them or preservatives. And I'll tell you, the biggest change I ever saw in my own body is when I switched to whole foods. And it was crazy because I felt like I was eating the same amount, if not more calories, but my body started shifting in its composition and how I felt just by eliminating preserved foods. It's just crazy. The preservatives alone, they alter the microbiome, the gut, all these things. So, but we're also looking at the chemicals that are in the food. But beyond that, we have to look what's not in the food. The nutrients in some of these, as far as micronutrients, aren't there. And that's why we do such advanced testing on the front end. We want to understand very, very quickly where your essential nutrient deficiencies are and start to work on those. And a lot of you found out, hey, the reason you have these deficiencies is because your gut is not working. So you can't absorb, right? So that's a bad situation. I mean, Darlene, in the years that we've been working together, and with all the patients that we've taken down the road of recovering their health, have you ever, I can't think of one, and I don't know if you can, have we ever had a patient that come in that didn't have nutrient deficiencies?
not even one. I mean, everyone has at least what, three I've seen
Yeah.
is the average.
And it changed.
Three nutrient deficiency.
Yeah. Yeah. And it changes as we go because we put bigger demands on your body, trying to get it to heal, trying to go through this recovery process. So your deficiencies change. And we see that a lot. That's one of the reasons we retest. And a lot of people they're shocked. They think, okay, well, everything's gonna be better now. Well, no, you've changed the demand on your body, right? So if you were working on your porch on your house and you decided you're gonna paint your house, and you had all this paint, but you focus on painting your house, guess what you're going to be deficient in? You're going to eventually run out of paint. So as we change the focus of your body, your demand for certain nutrients changes. And we try to get you to a balanced spot, but your body's demands will always change. And there's certain things you're always going to need more. And genetically and your exposures throughout your life changes the way your body uses certain micronutrients. So even through our program, we'll still make shifts. And we always tell people, look, About once a year, come back, get some lab work done if you're not doing a maintenance program with us, so that we can, keep working on those nutrient deficiencies. But the best thing you can do is make sure your gut's working, make sure your digestive enzymes are good, make sure that your stomach acid is healthy, make sure your bacteria is where it needs to be, and then make sure you're getting whole foods and supplementing. And then you still have to look. It sounds more complicated than it is. Just like do a spot check, just like you go and get your teeth looked at after you've had some massive dental work the rest of your life. You're usually pretty good at going to get your teeth looked at or cleaned. Same thing. You want to get your body looked at, and that's what we do. So also on the side of things that we can ingest is medication. So the chemicals just aren't in the food, but it's also medications. We know medications are killing people like crazy. This is actually an amazing book called Death by Medicine. And they said, and this guy actually used to work for the National Institute of Health. And they found that the total number of iatrogenic deaths by accident, increased. And if this is from properly prescribed treatments. So from properly prescribed treatments, medications, or surgeries, in the US, and this was a few years back, annually it was almost 800,000. It overruled people dying from cancer, which is crazy. So that's Death by Medicine, amazing book. So just as a recap, we talked about that digestive system, right? A lot of this stuff can begin in the gut. We want to make sure that the gut's healthy. We want to make sure that you have good bacteria, digestive enzymes, and that you eat slow, you take your time eating. But stress affects all these different aspects. And in Chinese medicine, we actually connect every internal organ to a digestive organ, like the heart and the small intestines, the lungs and the large intestine, the kidney with the bladder. So you have all these connections, but it's because like thousands of years ago, they understood that the digestive tract was so critical to every aspect of our health. And so we focus a lot on that. And a lot of you know that. Some of this is repeated information, and we're just re-emphasizing or highlighting the fact. But when we look at leaky gut, there's this amazing study, and here recently I was looking at some newer research about how stress in the mind, and so what we were talking about today is stress, but and how it creates leaky gut, but also poor sleep, how that disrupts the body, because that's when you release growth hormone. That's when you regulate your immune system. That's when your cortisol and your blood sugar are supposed to be established. So poor sleep can affect these. And then stress immediately causes leaky gut. There's a really great study. And what they did is they looked at animals that had induced a little bit of stress with an electric probe on their brain just to mimic like a stressful day. And these rats had all previously had zero issues with their digestive tract. And within 48 hours, over 96% of these rats had some problem in their digestive tract just from simulated stress. And similarly, when we see traumatic brain injuries in humans, the blood-brain barrier gets leaky within just a few hours. And then without really true understanding, within just a few hours, you get leaky gut. But it's this it's this stress model of the neural activity in your brain affecting your gut, the digestive or the enteric system. It's called the neuroenteric axis, and it's quite studied. So we know stress immediately damages your gut, and we said fire in the gut, fire in the brain, right? So we get this whole leaky gut process, and this can lead to a lot of these different problems. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on here, but we know it affects the whole body. And then the toxins that we were talking about, this stuff happens at birth. They're finding, babies that haven't even been born yet when they do an amniocentesis, which they pull amniotic fluid off. Many of these babies have over 500 chemicals that they're being exposed to that aren't natural in utero. They're not even born yet. They're being exposed to chemicals. So that just is.
100.
What's that?
It used to, the last time I read a few years ago, it was like 200 chemicals. Now it's 500.
500, right? It's crazy. It's growing, right? So this stuff isn't just happening to us as adults. It's not like you have to offset what happened to you or what choices you made in your lifetime. a lot of times we're offsetting the choices that were made and the exposures we had before we were even in this world, right? So it's crazy. So let's talk about it in the brain. One of the things that triggers this is, and when you say, well, how does the brain or my thoughts affect an inflammatory process? Well, when you have a stress response, the neurotransmitters that are released, they put your body into flight or fight. We used to have this, you know, it was okay to have a stress response if you walk out to your mailbox and you saw a tiger or a bear. But our bodies haven't adapted. Our stress responses are always constantly triggered. So now you would have almost the same stress response to walking out to check your mail and finding a tiger chasing you as you would if you went to open your mailbox and you found an unexpected bill. Or like say you got a letter from the IRS, same stress response. Your body knows there's a threat, so it triggers your flight or fight. It moves circulation away from your important digestive organs, moves them to your blood. It increases your blood sugar for quick energy. But that's happening to people on a daily basis, multiple times in a day. So we're automatically getting this leaky gut, this inflammatory process. Our digestive systems are depleted. Our stress mechanisms are depleted, and chronic stress weakens our immune system. And now we have a systemic inflammatory response because we lack the ability for our immune system to be controlled. I know that's kind of a rabbit hole, but stress makes you freak out, and stress also makes your body freak out. Here's some research. They said stress and neuroinflammation, that's brain inflammation. And earlier I talked about the microglial cells in your brain. Those are your macrophages, and they can spill out inflammatory molecules. They found that stress causes dysregulation of your microglial cells, which means your body can no longer control them. So they start eating things they're not supposed to eat. They start releasing chemicals that are inflammatory or pro-inflammatory. And totally outside of the implications on the rest of the body, they found that it started triggering mental illness. And Darlene can speak to this. How many times have we seen improvements in mental illness by cleaning up someone's inflammation?
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens regularly. People
Yeah.
who have depression or anxiety or even the tendency for that, and they are systematically cleaning up their diet and addressing stress and doing things for stress management, they can see a difference, and that's really great.
We've seen improvement in manic depression, bipolar, ADD, ADHD, autism, anxiety, even just poor memory, dementia, Parkinson's, all these things we've seen improvement in just by reducing the inflammation. So it's like, okay, well, how much of your personality is being determined by your level of inflammation? And that's a good question to ask. Here's another study on stress and neuroinflammation, and they found that stressors result in pro-inflammatory responses in the brain, and it affects your neuropeptides, which help your body, your cytokines, and your stress hormones. So this is just knowing that just stress triggers an inflammatory process in the brain, and we said that's the worst place for it to be in your head, right? It's the worst place for it. The only thing that should be up there is hopes and dreams, right? So this is just a review of some of the neurotransmitters of the brain. So serotonin, oxytocin, that's that deep recovery and your deep sleep. You got the struggle, which is your cortisol and your epinephrine. Some of you, we've actually measured, many of you, probably 99% of you on here, we've measured your cortisol. And it was either depleted or it was too high. And here's an example of it being in your head's a bad idea. When your cortisol is up, it dysregulates your blood sugar. When your cortisol is up, it dysregulates your ovulation. When cortisol is up, it lowers testosterone from men. When cortisol is up, it suppresses your thyroid hormone, right? When cortisol is up, it triggers a stress response that feeds malignancy. So, these are bad things. So, we got to get to that nitric oxide. That released nitric oxide causes vasodilation. So it's systemic inflammatory response just from stressful thoughts. It's incredible what it can lead to. Here's talking about sleep. And this is a really great research article, Fatigue, Sleep, and autoimmune and related disorders. And what they found that there was a bidirectional relationship between sleep and circadian disturbances. So if your sleep, when you wake up, or your sleep not being restful, triggers an increase in the autoimmune response. Chronic insomnia is associated with an increased incidence in developing autoimmune disease, which is inflammatory. It's an inflammatory disease. So just by not getting enough sleep, your immune system turns on you and starts attacking your own body. That's a crazy idea. It's a crazy thought process. Here's another one, and this is specifically on rheumatoid arthritis. Like, we can actually nail down the disease. And they found that if your sleep cycle was off, that's your circadian rhythm, which is involved in nightly synthesis of pro-inflammatory cytokines. There's those inflammatory chemicals, cytokines and chemokines. Cells were more likely to migrate into inflamed tissues, phagocytosis, so your body started chewing up your healthy tissue. You'd start getting proliferation of inflammatory cells. So chronic inflammatory conditions such as RA, it's what it says at the bottom. It says the amplitude of circadian rhythm, the disruption of that circadian, because it has to be balanced. The amplitude needs to be balanced. It has an anti-inflammatory effect. If your sleep cycle is out of control, then you're going to get a disruption in an inflammatory process, adrenal chronic stress, and can trigger a disease process, and then vice versa. So you want to get some rest. It's a key piece to healing. Okay. This is actually from Harvard, 6 relaxation techniques to reduce stress, focusing on your breathing. And in your one-on-ones with Darlene or Andrea or Jennifer, any of our staff that are working with you, either here in Denver or at our Houston offices, when we're looking at these things that will be brought up, like focusing on your breathing, just mindfulness. And that's all it is. Mindfulness means being mindful. That's all it means. It's not some esoteric idea. Body scan is like just kind of going through and feeling your body, paying attention, putting attention on very specific parts of your body. Guided imagery, mindfulness meditation, Tai Chi yoga and Qigong, and then repetitive prayer. All of these were really good stress responses. And before you are a naysayer, you throw this out, there's research on it. I love my research. And each one of these had really good outcomes, from biofeedback to relaxation, stress management. You'll see different things in here. People doing all kinds of different stuff. Lots of good research on these different things. So the idea behind everything is, when we are looking at getting your body put back together, get it where it's functioning, you have to look at sleep and you have to look at stress management. It's not an option not to. And some of you may have had chronic sleep issues. You struggle with that, and you still should work on it. Regardless of how hard it is, you still do the things that you can do to make it better, because it can always be worse. It can always be worse. And there's just certain things certain people are going to struggle with. And we get that. We see those. Some of us deal with those things ourselves. But if you're not doing what you can, it will always and can always get worse. So you have to look at those things, right? So that guy was in our webinar, he don't even know it. So you have to look at your stress, because it drives inflammation. And it's not an option not to look at it. It has to be looked at. It can be the one single thing that continues to undermine your health. It is known to trigger inflammation. It is known to disrupt your immune system. It's known to lower your growth hormone, where you can't heal. You can't recover. You can't regulate your hormones. It's just as bad as having a serious infection. It really is. So stress and sleep both need to be looked at. Sleep is good for recovery. It's also balancing. Stress by itself, unregulated, causes a lot of problems. And if you need more research, there's tons out there. You get on the National Institute of Health and look at these things. But, we talk about relaxation pieces. We talk about sleep hygiene, putting your phone down, making sure it's not the first thing you look at when you wake up in the morning. That's the last thing you want, is that phone just sitting there and being like, hey, look at all the bad stuff that's already happened today while you were sleeping. That's the last thing you want, right? You'd be getting your mind right, go into the day with positivity. If some people found it better to move their phone away. Even a little bit of light at night can disrupt you. But there's a lot of sleep hygiene techniques and stress management techniques that really need to be taken um, not lightly. And Darlene and all of our other coaches, they're excellent at helping you narrow down the things, and don't dismiss them. They're just as important as those supplements, just as important as the diet. That's why there's 5 healthy behaviors. There's not one. There's 5, and we need to be able to implement all those. So I hope everybody got some good information. Is there anything, Darlene, that you want to add to today's class?
No, I think you emphasized it really well. It is, I've been saying this a lot more nowadays than over the years, I noticed, but it's not just food. And in fact, stress management is the aspect that we work on more so than food. So you do the food, everyone's so concerned about that, but you get that down. And then I find that the stress management for everyday function is what we spend the most attention on, to balance and correct.
Yeah.
And then we don't even talk about food. We don't talk about even the supplements. We talk about how do we get you regulated and how do you take this more seriously.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when they do start to see those changes almost faster than the food and the exercise.
Yeah. If you have like, what we've found like with Epstein-Barr virus, people who can get their sleep under control, they bring down their antibody numbers way faster with any chronic infections. With autoimmunity, you need to get that in control. If with stress, huge impacts on our fertility patients, right? Um, it's crazy. And then giving your body a chance to heal. So if you have any really chronic disease process that's going on, um, proper sleep, proper rest, and proper management of stressful events in your life, or that mindfulness, so critical. There's no shame in getting a therapist. We've all had them. I really encourage people to have a personal therapist. I mean, if you're going to have somebody that teaches you how to play tennis or teaches you how to drive a car, why would you not work with someone that teaches you how to be a better human being or just be a better version of yourself? Because that's all we're doing here. So these are all things you want to look at, and you want to implement these pieces in your life. And as we wrap up, one thing I want to say, and we don't say this enough, is that health is not static. Just because we get you there doesn't mean that you're going to stay there, because every day you go out in the world and the 5 triggers are just waiting for you: foods, bugs, stress, hormones, and toxins. They're all out there waiting, and you implement the 5 healthy behaviors to minimize the impact and keep yourself as healthy as possible. And it is something that you constantly need to be mindful of. It doesn't have to run your life. Right now, we're in a very particular space where we're focusing on your problems. That's why you're here. But once you get those things under control, it doesn't mean health stops. Healthy decisions don't stop there. You take these things and you implement them, and when you're not feeling well, you go back and go, okay, let me look at these 5 healthy behaviors. What am I not doing? What could I put a little bit of effort into? We all have to do it. We do that in our office. You should see all of us. So when new supplements come out, we're like, should I be taking that? New peptides, we're like, I think I should be on that, right? New tests, we're like, I think I need to get that test. We're all eager to do those things, and so should you. So again, hope everybody had a wonderful class, some really good information. And remember, up here is the worst place for certain things to be. Any closing statements, Darlene?
No, I hope people really see the value of this, and it helps switch your perspective on the amount of control that you really do have in your health.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, Darlene, thanks for being here today, and everybody that was able to see this and joined us. And in the future classes, take care of yourself. We're really rooting for you, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks.